Today is November 18th, 2019. My name is Natalia Pacheco and I am joined by Dylan Stone, a Salem State University student and Marine Corps veteran. Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed today.
You're welcome.
So I want to start a little bit before now. I want to talk about your high school experience a little bit. What kind of student were you back then?
I was a pretty quiet student back in high school. Started getting pretty quiet like my freshman year. I was brand new to the school, and I got into sports. I was playing football and I wrestled, so I knew a lot of the popular people and a lot of the athletes of the school, and I was friends with them. But besides that, I was a pretty quiet student. My mom was pretty surprised by that because I was very talkative. But I enjoyed history as the classes there, as well as gym. For the most part, did great in those classes, but had like average grades. Just run in the middle of the graduating class. That's pretty much how my high school had went.
Okay. Did you have any ambitions when you were in high school? Like you said, you liked history and that you were good at sports. Did you were you on any teams? Were you trying to pursue anything back in high school?
For that, after high school, graduating,
Yeah.
I actually wanted to be a teacher at the time, and my counselors had actually told me that based on my grades, I probably wouldn't do that well in school. So I actually didn't go into the teaching degree for a major. At the time, when I got out of high school, I went to the local community college and just did some criminal justice classes because I had planned on thinking about doing police officer or something along those lines at the time. That was about the most ambitious thing I had at the time.
Okay. So what kind of what were your expectations before joining the military? What made you want to enlist?
The thing that made me want to enlist really was I did the semester at the school. I didn't go the next spring just because money was tight at the time. The state of Michigan actually changed its Michigan Indian tuition waiver. Quarter Ottawa Indian from my dad's side, and up through my entire life, up going into my senior year, I would have qualified for the tuition waiver, and they changed it to federally recognized tribes only. My tribe is actually state recognized, Grand River Band of Ottawa Indians. So that kind of changed up what I wanted to do after school, which forced me to kind of go to the community college. Only did it for that one semester. It was 2011, so the job market wasn't necessarily that great in my area of Michigan, pretty small area. So I was just kind of stuck at home, and my mom actually spoke to me about what I wanted to do choice-wise. So I looked into the armed forces, what branches I wanted to look into. And my dad is also a Marine veteran as well, and when he found out about that, he decided to pull me over to the recruiter station, and I had a chat with them. On the second time talking to the recruiters, I signed the paperwork there to enlist.
Wow. So, you mentioned your dad. Did he talk about his experiences as a veteran when you were growing up?
A little bit. He didn't talk too much about it. I knew he was a Marine, of course. At the time, I had no idea what the military really was, or even what the Marine Corps specifically did as well. And what I knew at the time growing up was that he lived in Spain. He had been on a submarine for a little bit, worked out of the Mediterranean. That's about all I knew at the time when I was growing up.
Wow. And then so what was it like once you signed the paperwork, you were about to leave? What was it the day you left home?
I signed the paperwork in March of 2012, and I actually didn't go to boot camp to San Diego up until August 20th. For the most part, a lot of people that sign the paperwork when they're in high school usually leave within a couple days of graduating or like the first couple weeks. But at the time, I didn't have like an MOS, a job chosen. I was kind of like open contract to a degree. So for like a few months, we were waiting on positions or jobs I wanted. And initially, one of the reasons why I joined the military was because I wanted to be military police. That actually wasn't open at all, so my recruiters were pretty cool with me not choosing a job right away. I ended up choosing 0231, Intelligence Specialist. Chose that on Father's Day for my dad because he had spoken a little bit more about what he did, and he did work in the intelligence area. So that's how I kind of found out about that. So I just chose Intel as one of my top choices. And then my dates to ship out to boot camp kept changing. Initially it was going to be in July, and then it got pushed up to August.
And you said you were going out to San Diego. What was like the name of the base you were at, and what was it like once you got there?
So the reason why I went to San Diego is because for the Marine Corps you either go to the East Coast, MCRD, Parris Island, or Marine Corps Recruit Depot, or you go to San Diego. It's actually based off the Mississippi River. So everyone from the East Coast area or region goes to the East Coast. Everyone west of the Mississippi go to the West Coast. However, Michigan is a split state. So a lot of people from eastern Michigan, Detroit, that area, they end up going over to Parris Island, and anyone kind of western portion of Michigan go to San Diego. But at the same time, you can also be, if your father or even your mother as well went to boot camp on a certain coast, you actually kind of have the option, at least back in the day, it may have changed, you could actually go to the same recruit depot as them. So I flew out of Michigan with about 6 other guys, all the way out to San Diego. And San Diego airport is actually right on the other side of the fence of the boot camp location. So when you fly in, you look out the window to the right, and you can actually see the huge tower that you climb or go down, and it says U.S. Marines on the side. It's a whole different new area compared to what I was used to, being in the woods, being along the Great Lakes, which are awesome beaches. Nothing can eat you. And then plopping right down in Southern California with palm trees and 90-degree weather on a nice day, nice and sunny. I think it rained like once when I was at boot camp probably. But yeah, you kind of get plopped down in like a whole new area. You go through like receiving, you're stuck with a bunch of people. But by the time, before you get there, you get on like a white bus. You only have your clothes and like a packet of paper with you. And you get on the bus, you look down at the ground, and they drive you all the way there. Then drill instructor comes up, yells at you, get off the bus, and you run outside.
That was like the first day.
Yeah, that was the first day we went up there, arriving there at night.
And then can you talk about kind of like the rest of your time there? Like what was it like? How was it was it different than what you expected it to be, or?
It was slightly different. The basic training and boot camps are kind of focused on teaching you the aspects of the military. The Marine Corps prides itself on drill, so you drill a lot. Going into it, my dad had told me that everything the drill instructors do is by a book. You know, everything they have is planned. So we got there, I kind of knew what was going to happen to a degree, that of course it was all going to be training. A lot of it was just a lot of drilling, a lot of practicing on understanding Marine Corps customs and Marine Corps history. A lot of people probably thought going in that it'd be a lot of physical work, and it was, to a degree. It was a lot of running, but it was kind of just to set you up for like the basic qualifications of passing physical fitness tests.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. I would have thought it would have been more physical, but that's kind of.
There's still a lot of physical work. a lot of hikes, a lot of running around, but it's all based about creating you as breaking you down. A lot of mental stress, a lot of like mental stress definitely, because they break you down and like mold you back up into like a new person.
I've heard so many people say that. Okay, so that's kind of like, I guess, a value of the name. Speaking of breaking down, I was kind of curious about the topic of just like hazing in the military. Is there any like truth to assumptions about hazing in the military and or the Marines specifically?
Due to Marine Corps orders as well as military orders, there's no hazing allowed. The only hazing that occurs is in boot camp. That's the only time frame. It used to be a big topic of a discussion in the past, in the 90s and early 2000s, when some incidences came about due to news organizations, and a lot of people saw, and the military cracked down on that.
It's good that there's been something done about it. And so your MLS, you kind of mentioned earlier, was an intelligence specialist and weapons and tactics instructor. Can you tell me what exactly that is? Like, what did you do? What did it require?
For the weapon tactics instructor, WTI or Intel analyst, or both. I can talk to them both.
Both. I would love to know.
Both. So the intelligence analyst or specialist is the all-source intelligence individual. So you have, when it comes to the intelligence field, you have the guys that work with sensors, the guys that work with satellites and mapping or topography. You have guys that work in counterintelligence, the prevention of leaked information or attempting to gather information. The all-source analyst or the intel analyst collects all that information, brings it together, and informs their command or their unit. That can range from a multitude of things, because the Marine Corps has a ground side and an air side. We are like a smaller version of the military. We have aircraft and tanks and infantry. So based on the unit you're with, if you're ground side, you're going to be telling infantry guys or grunts what could be occurring in the village down the road, what type of manpower there is, or personnel with weapons or technical vehicles. Or you could be on the air side with aircraft, telling them what type of threats, missile sites or surface air missile sites, guys with man-portable air defense systems or different types of radars or other aircraft in the area. And that's kind of what it comes to a real-world situation when you're on deployment to different locations throughout the world, of course. So it's a very broad subject. You can be back in what we consider the rear or in garrison when you're stationed stateside. You're going through courses to learn more on intelligence, or you're training newer Marines in the aspect of intel. But it can be as easy as just going on Google.com, looking at the news, seeing what's going on, and reporting that to your unit as well, letting them be informed on the current events of the world or the areas of responsibility of the units in charge of. So that's kind of like the basic rundown of intelligence analysts. It's a huge, broad topic, to be honest. You usually get pushed into one area and then focus on that. For WTI is the Weapons and Tactics Instructors course for the Marine Corps Aviation. That expands upon the entire aspect of Marine Corps Aviation. You train multiple jobs. It's a huge, about 2-month course out in Yuma, Arizona. It is the Marine Corps' version of like Top Gun for the Navy, which isn't just a movie. WTI focuses on giving a general knowledge level of that air aspect of the Marine Corps to everyone that's involved in. You have people that work in operations, people that work in intelligence, you have pilots, you have guys that work with the radars, with missile systems, such as Patriot systems. You have even the guys that create the airfields. Everyone's involved. It's about 300 students per course, and there's about 2 courses a year, and approximately it costs about $200,000 per individual go through it. For the most part, it's a officer level course. I went through it as a corporal. I actually got chose by my unit to do it because I just came from an air unit out in Japan. I came out to California to my unit there. I got chose, got like 2 weeks heads up, and got rushed into that. But for intel, you learn threat adversary capabilities, as well as limitations. You learn about U.S., or what we call Blue Forces, capabilities and limitations. For the intel side of it all, you learn the basic or more advanced capabilities of all of our aircraft that the Marine Corps owns, all of the radar systems, how our airfields are made, from the airfield guy all the way up to the satellite. You learn everything in between that, as well as some other fancy capabilities of ours.
So like, what did you like most about that? Because you said it was quite broad. Is there like specific aspects that interested you more, or that you thought you were best at?
For best at, I loved the air side for intel, understanding what our aircraft could do, as well as what other nations' capabilities are as well. And working in the intelligence field with classified information, it's pretty nice to learn about that. There's nothing really too crazy that's classified. It's usually just more accurate numbers. That's how that works for the most part. But I loved understanding how we countered certain systems. You know, how did we stop an infrared missile from targeting an aircraft, or radar guided missiles? Especially liked the man pads, or that man portable air defense systems. That's when you see the movies, the guy shooting a rocket launcher off his shoulder at aircraft flying by. I became a SME on that, a subject matter expert on the different generations of those weapon systems that are found all over the world. Run into a lot out in the Middle East, a lot older systems. When I was on deployment, I became a SME on the use of commercial drones, DJI Phantoms, and their capability of using weapons or explosives by insurgent groups. That became a huge thing in Syria, Iraq, as well as Yemen. Not so much in Yemen, because that had not been seen previously, and the capabilities to prevent those systems from operating in our airspace, or U.S. controlled airspace, is limited at this time. I was the one guy on deployment that was the expert on that, so that was pretty nice.
A lot of studying.
Yes.
A lot of studying. So you mentioned Syria, but you were also stationed in the Philippines. Can you tell me about like your experiences at both these places?
So I wasn't in Syria. My deployment for that one, at least, was I was on a ship, Marine Expeditionary Unit. We pretty much, you hop on a ship, you go from California to the Middle East and back. Took about 7 months. When you're on a ship, it's a little bit different. A lot of the guys that go into Afghanistan and Iraq, you have very specific areas that you're in charge in. When you're on a ship, you kind of have to think on your feet on what's going to happen next in certain areas. A lot of people get bored on a boat, but for intel, you're constantly busy, working 12 on, 12 off. We did support operations in Syria, Iraq, as well as Yemen, of course. We floated all through that area around the Arabian Peninsula. So that was a long time frame, as well as potential support in Africa, but we did do a lot of stuff out there. That's completely separate from the Philippines. when I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, with Marine Aircraft Group 36, Mag 36. I was part of the command element, and we were deployed to the Philippines for a humanitarian disaster relief operation, or a HADR. That was in late, I think, October of 2013. We were deployed there because they were actually hit by a Cat 5 typhoon that wiped out a good portion of infrastructure and also led to a lot of casualties, a lot of people that were definitely injured or have passed away from it. It was huge. It had gone through the central location, or the central islands of the Philippines. So we were actually in a field op, like doing some actual training. Got word that we were going, and we hopped right on a C-130, went to my back to my unit, back to my barracks, grabbed all our stuff, and we left the next day down to the Philippines. I was pretty young at the time. I was like brand new to the Marine Corps, at least to my unit. I'd only been there for a couple of months. So at the time frame, what I assisted in was the locating of people that needed medicine, supplies, shelter, anything of the sort, even evacuation. We had about like 6 maps printed out and laid up on a wall like this, and I kind of pinpointed the area. So you used Twitter, you used different sources of information, of course, even from the Philippine government on these locations, and I would brief it to the officers in charge of me in my office, as well as people that worked in operations, and they planned out the daily flights around that information and would send out MV-22 Ospreys to those locations to drop off aid or to assist anyone. But we were only there for maybe 3 weeks. It wasn't very long. When it comes to the U.S. military involved in humanitarian crisis abroad, we are pretty much there for a very short time. You get sent out, you kick as much stuff out as you can to people, and then you actually have U.S. AID or U.S. aid finish out the rest. They kind of actually take charge of the military in certain situations, or at least the forces involved. But we were there, worked 12 hours on, 12 hours off. That was pretty new to me. Definitely kicked up our idea of what we needed to do for humanitarian operations later on in the future. We ended up helping with Nepal in 2015 after the earthquake. I did not go. I was actually supposed to PCS, or Permanent Change Station, over to California, and I was actually on call to get sent out to Nepal for like a couple weeks, and I told them, no, I'm not going to go. I have to go to California to my new unit.
Did you like work closely with like, because you said that you were like gathering information from like the government, but also like Twitter. Did you work closely with like locals or like maybe like police forces or anything like that to try and find people and target specific areas?
For the most part, due to how we operate, and especially like the units I was with, or at least the sections of the units, I was for the most part with the command elements. You would have, maybe some squadrons. We had squadrons where the unit that actually had the aircraft, we were the unit above them. We kind of told them what to do, and those guys at like a ground level would end up doing that. So for my take on it, we had guys that worked in counterintelligence that would assist in certain things, mostly just the protection of materials that we were getting rid of or had around. But personally, I didn't go out and necessarily assist during my deployments or in my time in the Philippines. However, it did kind of change when we sent people to Nepal, just because of how much damage there was. They didn't really need anyone to work in intelligence, so my Marine that was sent, he actually didn't really do his job. He helped, though, with casualty evacuations, taking people on stretchers off of the aircraft. So he definitely did a lot more hands-off or hands-on approach. But for the most part, I was kind of like more the guy in the back, which was kind of sad at certain times.
Well, also very important. Like
Mhm.
you had to show people where to go. And do you think you made do you think you had a big impact on that deployment, or which one do you think, which deployment or place do you think had the most impact on you?
I think assisting with humanitarian operations were probably my biggest things. We helped out with, of course, the Philippines, and we also helped out with Nepal. And that was probably the biggest things that were important to me, at least. Like, a lot of people, join the military and you hear a lot about, people going into combat, which is obviously of significance. But you don't necessarily hear too much about the military assisting people, building schools or anything like that, which we usually do a lot of kissing babies and shaking hands. We try and do that to have a positive influence on the local population that we're interacting with. And I think the biggest thing for me really was like being involved into humanitarian operations and seeing that it assisted, thousands or tens of thousands of people. It just depends.
So wonderful. And so you were away for several months each time. Did you communicate it a lot with like family or friends back home during this time?
So back in the day, before iPhone was like a big hit type thing, I had like a small Android and would like text my friends and family when I was at like my intelligence school over in Virginia. So it was super simple, like texts and stuff. For the training schools, it was kind of like a 9 to 5 type thing. For the most part, a lot of times you did stay later. And of course, you couldn't bring your phone into the building just because classified materials and all that stuff. And then when I left the Intel school, I immediately went out to Japan, to that first unit, MAG 36. So what I ended up doing was my mom forced me to get an iPhone 4S, I think, at the time, so I could FaceTime her. And then you can use, Wi-Fi to send messages, text messages, rather than having to use long distance or anything. So I was able to keep pretty good contact with my family and some of my friends, but over the years, at times you just kind of lose communication with people. I don't really talk to a lot of people from way back in high school. When I was deployed on the MEU, or I deployed with the 11th MEU, that's when I went out into the Middle East and stuff on the ship. Did have access to the internet, but it was super slow. I worked on like 3 different computers. One of the computers was like unclassified, so you can hop on Google.com, Facebook.com. You couldn't load any pictures or anything. The bandwidth was so slow. But you had email. You could email people, and you receive packages. You could order something on Amazon, and then every time we made a port or we stopped at a country for like a few days, I'd run up my phone bill by like $100, texting people.
So at least you could like kind of keep in touch with people.
Yeah.
So you kind of mentioned like everything was kind of slow. You lost touch with some people over the years. So do you think like that time in the service, because you were kind of disconnected, like affected a lot of relationships you had, or it was kind of the ones that were important just kind of stayed strong?
The ones that were pretty important stayed pretty strong. Not a lot of my friends joined the military at all at the time. Pretty good group of people, but they kind of just got stuck doing the same thing. Landscapers and plowers, that's kind of what they did. Mechanics, nothing wrong with it, but I think they still all do like that same work, and I'll be like 27 in like December, so they're kind of stuck in that field. Definitely communicated, of course, with my family a lot, of course, but had some implications with like my sister, who is like my full-blooded sister. I have a bunch of step siblings, but she was the only one that, of course, I've known since like all our lives. Really, she was only 2 years younger than me. She was pretty annoyed that I'd left, but that only lasted for like a year or two. We constantly talked like all the time, every day. But when it came to like impact on the relationships, really it was just like some of my friends from high school doing the same thing. Just kind of lost contact with them, just because stationed out or I was at school in Virginia, so I couldn't really go home. I was stuck there for like 6 months, and then of course when I went out to Japan, tickets were like $1,000, it was weird. I paid like $1,400 to go home. That was pretty sad. But I only went home once at like my year mark on island, and then the next year I went straight to California. Then I only went home about 3 or 4 times when I was in.
So was it like common for like people in your? It wasn't that common, I guess, for like people in like Michigan to like enlist, or at least where you were.
My school had some people that really wanted to join the military, and then they didn't. I would say maybe the area that I had lived in, 'cause my parents were divorced. I lived with my mom. The area that I lived in, a lot of people probably just didn't go for the military and went straight for school. It was more of a upper middle class type area. But I actually enlisted out of near my dad's house, which is more low income area. And you could see a big difference in the fact that a lot of people in that area that I knew from back in the day enlisted. I have about like 3 or 4 people I think I know prior to high school and enlisted. I only knew one person from my town actually that I actually knew very well. He actually enlisted, became an 0231 intel analyst like myself, and he actually ended up on the same deployment as me when I went out to the Middle East. So that was a surprise seeing him walk into my office one day. Yeah, that was about it. I think the area I grew up in high school at least, there weren't too many people enlisted in the military.
Well, you mentioned that someone from back home was kind of with you for one of your deployments. Did you like connect with a lot of people, or who did you connect with most, I guess, while you were away? Because you were away on a boat for 7 months and then again later on in the Philippines.
So for deployment on ship, so for when it comes to intel, you work in a very close-knit group of people, and it's multiple different ranks. Depending on the unit, you could be in a huge unit full of intel guys, you might be like a very small shop with 3 or 4 people, and you work with a range of ranks. You work very closely with officers, with staff NCOs or non-commissioned officers. You can be a private working with a captain in the Marine Corps, and it definitely changes the professionalism, not the professionalism to a degree, but like the workplace etiquette to a degree. I don't know how to explain it. So like when you're 18 years old or 19 years old, you're brand new to the Marine Corps, and you're enlisted, and you see someone who's only like 24, 25 years old with something shiny on their collar, usually, start freaking out a little bit and get worried, this officer's coming by, you gotta be messed up. But when it comes to intel, you get very used to that because you work hand in hand with like other Marines that are going to be officers or are going to be, someone who's been in for like 23 years and you've only been in for, 2. So my shop, there was about 4 or 5 of us who'd been roughly the same amount of time frame. And then there were people, who'd been in for like 20 plus years. And we're all, somewhat friends, of course. In the shop you're all friendly, you work together. We play board games or something on our free time, or watch a movie in our office with the Navy, because they were actually, their intel section was on the other side. But besides that though, you always use ranks, and, you always spoke to them professionally, and then outside of work you hung out with like people within your own rank structure, rank area.
And did those like relationships end up like lasting once you've left, or Like, is there anyone that you still are still in contact with?
Oh yes, plenty of people that I was on deployment with. I talked to a lot, of course. My staff NCOs or like my chief warrant officer. You know, I have them on Facebook, have them in my resume on LinkedIn. So you definitely have very strong connections with these people, especially when it comes to like a deployment. You become like somewhat like a family together.
So what were the like stated objective of your deployments, and like do you feel like you accomplished what you wanted to once you?
So for the Philippines, assisting our real objectives was really to get a better understanding of what occurred, the type of damage and casualties that did happen, and like what we could do about it. So it was you're always prepared for it, and that was a long time ago. But for the objectives, it's really for that to assist as much as we can until we determine we're kind of like the Band-Aid, I guess, for humanitarian operations when like the U.S. military gets involved. Once it start, it's a brand new cut, wipe it clean, put a Band-Aid on it, and then wait a few days, rip it off, and it should be healed, and then the body kind of takes care of it. It's pretty much how it goes for us. You go in, you do a lot of work right away. Once NGOs or non-government organizations start stepping in, those are the people that are going to be helping with the rest of the humanitarian crisis. Almost always, civilians from other countries or even locals in that area, they're going to step in, start taking care of everything else, and then you pull out. So we definitely accomplished that. For my MEU, deploying on ship, it's a little bit different because the mission can change within a moment's notice. We're just sailing past Hawaii when we got word that we had to check on like a boat. Chinese national, he actually did a like a single like a lone, what's it called, like a lone sailing from mainland China all the way to the United States. He actually went from China to the U.S. and was on his way back. And he had an emergency team that was like a few nautical miles away, and a storm popped up, and his GPS like safety device kind of went off on the boat because I guess it was off course. So like we got wind of that and immediately started helping out, finding out what had happened. He ended up getting blown over. The storm was about like 20 knot winds, so the boat he was on, the catamaran, was just flying through the water, and there was honestly no way that person could catch up to that. So something even small like that can happen. When we went out to start going into the Middle East, you get word of different missions they may have to be involved in, different operations that may occur. We did assist in like special operations raids in Yemen against AQAP, Al-Qaeda in Arabian Peninsula. The U.S. wasn't very big in Syria or Iraq. Before our ship actually went in, we actually sent a lot of our artillerymen going in. I think that was like one of the first units into Syria. Potentially, I don't remember off the top of my head. And then also with embassy evacuations. U.S. has embassies all over the U.S. all over the world, of course. So if there's an issue, if there's upheaval in a country, U.S. citizens are sent to the embassy or to a safe area, and that's something that we'd help in. And that was one of the things that we were preparing for in South Sudan because of issues occurring there. So a lot of this stuff can happen last minute. Somali pirates, Islamic State going between the Middle East and Africa. You just kind of pick up on some of this stuff going through. It's weird. It's like being on a boat and or like a video game, I guess. Yeah, you get side quests all the time, just running through a town, and that's kind of like what it is being on the ship.
Very like exciting. It sounds like there's like so much going on all the time.
To a degree, it can be somewhat exciting. It can be very boring because you hear about this stuff and you prepare for it and you get excited that you are going to do it, and then they turn around and say no, we're not going to get involved, or someone else is going to take the reins on this one, and then all your excitement just dissipates.
Well, that's fair. Like, I guess that's fair because you're just your intelligence at this point, right? You're just kind of like looking for stuff. But, do you feel like the time in the service was worth it for you?
Oh yes, I had a grand time. It was most fun I've had in my life probably. There was a lot of really crappy parts, of course, and you always have to deal with when it comes to the military, specifically the Marine Corps. But I mean, I had never traveled outside the United States prior to, and been to 8 different countries, went all over the United States for training or different events. Was part of the color guard for Seattle Sea Fair, so I went up to Washington State to go to Seattle to be the right rifleman. So you see those guys at these, sporting events, guys with the American flag and the dress blues walking. And they had no events signed up for us, so we got to do 4 days of day drinking for that, and then you just hopped on a boat and went down back to California. But there was a lot of fun. I probably would have stayed in had not I thought of getting my education done while I was younger. Sometimes it's kind of sad to see all these guys who've been in for like 20 years who only have like high school diploma, or they might be getting their associates taking one class at a time, which is definitely they're worth keeping in the military for the most part. But I just couldn't see myself sitting in a classroom at the age of 35 to get my degree. Some people do it. I have nothing against it, but I figured to get my education done nice and early.
So education was like very important to you, at least enough to leave, right?
Yes. Some other things had popped up. Some of the command in my unit that I deployed with was pretty, a lot of us consider it toxic, but it was definitely like not worth being around at times. So that was pretty sad to see and deal with. So we kind of just, I was like, no, I don't want to necessarily deal with that. But education was super important to me from the get-go. That was part of, of course, the recruiters preach to you about all the benefits that you can have, going to boot camp and joining the military. And I saw it as one avenue of completing my education. It's free for me and I get paid to do it.
And so what made you want to enroll in Salem State?
Let's see. To want to enroll at Salem State. So initially, I would say I would go back to when I was on deployment. I was trying to decide if I wanted to move back to Michigan or not. There's great schools out there, very far from where I live, and we do get BH for school, basic allowance for housing, and that's pretty much free money each month, and it's very low in Michigan. It'd be like $1,100 a month if I lived in Ann Arbor and went to University of Michigan, or it would be like $900 or $700 where I was from. Pretty low. So I actually had a friend that is from Massachusetts, so I moved out here because of deployment, and because I got back out of deployment in May of 2017, and I was actually getting out of the Marine Corps in August of 2017. I didn't have time to sign up for the schools. Salem State was going to be one of the ones that I was going to sign up for, so went to North Shore Community College, did the 2-year transfer program there. I chose Salem State though specifically because actually one of the professors, Dr. Lawrence Davis over at North Shore, spoke highly of Salem State when it came to the history program, and they do a lot of traveling, especially to historical sites in Eastern Europe and everything. And I thought that was pretty cool. I had never really heard of a lot of colleges doing that. Could just mean being ignorant, not knowing. But Salem State, I only heard like good things about it. My girlfriend goes here. One of my roommates goes here now. It's also like 10 minutes down the road from me.
Checked all the boxes. And so you were talking about the history department and how they do a lot here, how it drew you here. You want to pursue public history. What about public history interests you?
For public history, for the most part, I love educating people on anything and everything. I mean, like I said, like I like the idea of being a teacher since high school. When I was in the Marine Corps, actually one of the aspects I didn't speak about when it comes to being a WTI is that you go back to your unit after being trained and you actually train more people to the standards that we want, so that I became a subject matter expert in certain things I did like, because that was the things I taught a lot of to Marines, especially new ones. I liked the idea of becoming a teacher for a long time, and then I kind of fell back from it a little bit. I have nothing against teaching, of course. I still think it's an extremely important profession, but when it came to public history, I thought it'd be really interesting to actually work with the things that you talk about. Intel, where I worked, everyone else did all the work, and then I compiled it into a PowerPoint and briefed, a couple people or a couple hundred people. And, if you're a historian, might be working in a location in a public library or a public historic site where you're hands-on with the things that you want to talk about. Even collecting information for yourself or the organization you're in, or, being a curator at a museum and talking to people in there, I don't know.
So do you have like a long-term goal for that? Like, since you don't want to be like in a classroom specifically.
Long-term goal, it's kind of iffy right now. I'm trying to decide if I want to get my master's degree and be more competitive in the market for it. I've been looking, of course, at different careers in different locations in Massachusetts. There's a lot of museums, a lot of historic sites. You have the national parks, which also use historians as well. So I've been kind of just looking around to see what kind of niche I can drop myself into.
And then how do you think military service has affected you as a student, if at all?
As a student, I did pretty poorly back in high school. When I got back, everything had started school again. I figured, I'm using, taxpayer funds for my GI Bill, so I might as well get good grades. But when it came to like military, really I don't like the idea of not turning in work or turning in late. I guess that can be derived from being in the military. So I always make sure I get my work done on time, if that means staying up till 1 in the morning, I don't know. But I think that's one of the things. I also talk a lot in class. I definitely opened up from high school. Find it extremely annoying when you're in a class of 19-year-olds and no one wants to answer a simple question. So I'll raise my hand, even if I have no clue what the answer is.
That's a good habit to have, honestly. At least turning in work on time and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Some people aren't like that here. So do you think that your combined military and college experience has shaped you into a different person than before you did either of these things? Because you went to some community colleges and you went to the military. Now you're at a university. How has that changed you over the years?
I would say how it changed me is, back in high school I was quiet. Did my sports. I was on the teams, varsity teams and stuff. Went home, played video games. Now it's more so. I go to work, go to classes, do my homework, and then I try to find something to do. I got into like different hobbies. I do a lot of photography because it gets you out of the house. Get involved, and also like traveling the world as well. When I was in Japan, I went all the way to the northern tip of the island, which is beautiful. Took pictures with my iPhone 4. They looked terrible, so I ended up getting a camera, and that's how I kind of got into that. So I guess shaping me as a person, I became a little bit more adventurous, a lot more outgoing, just probably due to the military and the Marine Corps. You're friends with everyone, people of all sorts of different backgrounds, very diverse backgrounds. So you kind of just you hang out with someone that you might not ever meet in your entire life outside of the military. And you kind of pick up on different aspects of how to act, how to talk, how to carry yourself. So when you get out of it, you're kind of a different person, of course. And then attending a university, you kind of go back into that school mindset with that military background, and you kind of become more, I would say, more of a professional student. Not to knock other students, because that'd be wrong, but sometimes you see students walking around in sweatpants, just waking up for class at 10:50, and you're dressed up wearing jeans and everything. So it just depends.
That's fair. That's fair. And then just to kind of wrap up, if you had to give one piece of advice to someone who was going into the Marines right now, what would it be?
For going into the Marine Corps, my dad told me actually that the Marine Corps is what you make of it. You can be sent to a really crappy unit or have a really crappy job and do a 9-to-5 type work schedule, or you might be, infantry and you're all sorts of all over the place. I don't have a lot of knowledge on what they do specifically for, work, but, at the end of the day, when you pretty much clock out to go, back to your barracks or go back to your family to, you can have fun with your friends, do whatever, When I think of that saying, I think of even when you're in a really crappy situation, you kind of have to embrace the suck, is what we also say. Try and get some enjoyment out of whatever you're doing. California can be cold during the winter, and might not enjoy it, but go out and do something, or might be on the East Coast when it's really hot and sticky out. Still go outside and do something. I knew a lot of guys that just kind of hated the unit that we were with, hated the fact that they were in Japan and played video games in their barracks room the entire time and binge drink on the weekends. And it was kind of sad because you're 2 years in this tropical location, considered Japan's Hawaii. You can go surfing, you can go, super cheap to learn how to scuba dive out there. I never scuba dived. I'm not much of a water person, but I like traveling around. So trying to make the best out of, certain situations that you're stuck in. So, Marine Corps is what you make of it.
But that's the end of my questions. So I think, we're good? Thank you.